everyone. My name is Leland, and I am here interviewing Miss Misa Sugiura, who is one of the authors and contributors to the anthology Come On In that is coming out really soon. Thank you so much for being here, Misa. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Yeah, I went for a swim this morning and I'm feeling good.
Good, good. I haven't gone swimming in so long, but I really hope that I can pretty soon because I need some, ocean medicine. For those of you who don't know, Come On In is an anthology that deals with stories of immigration, whether they are children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. The authors have come together to tell their stories, and stories that really give a nuanced discussion on what really is involved in immigration and why it's not just what you hear in the news or you see on TV, and just really gives you a personal story of what to really understand when you talk to somebody who has dealt with immigration, or somebody who has immigrants in their family or is an immigrant themselves in real life. So I hope that you guys have a chance to read this when it comes out. And I am going to be talking about Miss Misa's story, where I am from. Is that correct? Or where I belong?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
I think where I'm from.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, that's one of the second or third stories on there. So get ready for that. My first question was, how did you get the opportunity to contribute to this anthology?
As I recall, so I'm part of a Facebook group of just young adult authors, and yeah, Addie just posted and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about putting together this anthology of stories from immigrants and children of immigrants, and who wants in?" So I just jumped. I happened to be on like minutes after he posted it, and I jumped right in.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
there's like a group on Facebook. So maybe some new ideas may come out of that group.
Yeah.
Maybe some other anthologies. That's so
Yeah.
awesome. Wow. What was your experience like telling this particular story?
I think the one reason I was so excited to do it is because I had so my first novel was about a daughter of an immigrant. And there was a lot that didn't make it into the novel. There were scenes that I wrote, and when you're preparing to write, or as you're writing a novel, there's all kinds of things you think about that end up not making it in. And I just thought this would be a great way to use all that stuff I hadn't been able to use in the novel and sort of weave it into a kind of a new narrative. So it was, I loved it. I loved kind of digging in, and there were a couple of autobiographical pieces in there, or like sort of stuff inspired by my own life, again, that I knew weren't right for the novel, and I was excited to have an audience for those too.
I actually read It's Not Like It's a Secret, and that is my first book that I read from you, so I'm excited to read This Time Will Be Different. And I did notice that there's a lot of nuances that people wouldn't understand if they didn't have parents that were immigrants, or especially parents that came from Japan, because I am part Japanese as well. So listening to her talk to her new friends about when she moved, and having that Asian parent meant, not coincidence, but similarity. I was like, that's my mom. So I love that book. I connected it to it in such a really amazing way that I've never connected to a book before. But I just want to say that since I get to talk to you today.
Yeah.
So what would you say was either the biggest difference in writing for an anthology versus writing your own novel, or what was the most challenging about the two?
Yeah. For me, I've realized that it's difficult for me to come up with a story that fits into a shorter time frame, right? I like to think about what's going to happen next month. One of the biggest chunks of text I always have to cut from my novels is all the backstory. So again, like, you can't waste time on backstory in a short piece for an anthology either. So that was, yeah, just the length of it was a challenge for me, and sort of getting right straight to the heart of what you want to say is hard for me.
Now I understand.
With shorter pieces, I tried to experiment with voice, and with there's within this one, it kind of sort of flips back and forth, and I try to do something different. I push the envelope a little bit for myself with the short form, as they say. So that's fun too.
Would you ever consider writing for a different anthology in the future after this experience?
I might. Same thing. Like oh, that's the other thing, is I mean, obviously, because it's a shorter piece, there's like some smaller deadlines, which I write slowly, so that was a challenge. I guess I would consider it. I prefer writing longer stuff, so I would have to be the right theme.
Right. Okay, that was a bonus question, but I was curious about that. Thank you. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the book. Hopefully it doesn't go into any spoilers for anyone that hasn't had a chance to read it yet. So if you don't want to hear about it yet, you can stop here, but we're going to talk about the story now. So in the very beginning, Chloe's mom asked Eriko's parents where they're from, where they're really from. Yeah. Have you ever had someone genuinely not understand why that question is considered rude or insulting?
I mean, I've been asked that question, so or in some form or other. So in that sense, yes. I've never confronted anyone on it, so I'm sort of more like Eriko's mom in that way. What I usually say is, I try to answer both of the questions at once and make a distinction, and I'll say, like, I was born and raised in Chicago. My parents are from Japan. And usually that satisfies people without, I'm kind of conflict avoidant, so that's where it's been left.
No, I understand. I'm the same way, especially when people will assume that I'm from somewhere totally different. I'm like, no, Hawaii, that's it. Where are your parents from? Oh, Guam, like, still in the US, we're just here. So I do understand that. I feel like I would have been Eriko's mom as well, just trying to say it without any confrontation. So I wanted to ask you that. One of the things that I also noticed was that when Eriko tells her parents that they shouldn't entertain anyone asking that question, and I understand her, her frustration and what seemed like anger for that part, her mom said that her response would have been considered rude if Eriko didn't answer, or if they didn't answer. So my question is a little weirdly phrased, so let me try to phrase it in a good way. For those who aren't familiar with either Japanese culture, Asian culture, East Asian culture, where they are really, very considerate of making sure that they aren't rude to other people, what or how would you want others who may not be familiar with that to understand why Eriko's mom felt that way versus why Eriko felt the other way?
I think sometimes I feel like, especially with my first book too, like the second generation, the protagonist ends up backing off sometimes, and I do sometimes worry that people will misunderstand and think like maybe the mom or the character herself is selling out, or not being strong enough. And yeah, that cultural more or value of really paying attention to the other person and making sure that they're not offended, and that sort of prioritizing the other person's feelings. I mean, of course, we all have to prioritize other people's feelings, but you know, like to the point where you will put yourself down and keep yourself back so that they are not uncomfortable. Um, as I understand it, at least in Japan, it's because everyone lives in such close quarters, you really can't afford to antagonize anybody. It's a shame-based society. Everybody is paying attention to everybody else. And so sort of historically, I think that's where that attitude comes from. And it is just drilled into everyone, you know, like the language is really polite. It's just, you know, it's about respecting people. There's that whole respect element too. And I had that same fight with my mom, that same one with my mom being, you know, being like, you know, I would be like, Mom, why do you put up with this? And she'd be like, you know, or I would tell her, oh, I finally said this to this person. And she like, why would you intentionally make someone feel uncomfortable? And yeah.
No, I understand that. That's my grandma. My grandma's a little bit more of the more traditional culture, I would say, as opposed to my mom and then me. So when it comes to me, she's just like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, it is a new day and age. We are not accepting that. And she's just like, so
Yeah.
I do understand that.
Yeah, I mean, then there's this whole thing called it's honne and tatemae, and honne is real feelings, or real, the root of yourself, and tatemae, it means like to build in front of, and tatemae is what you show everybody but your closest friends, because yeah, it's just too risky to sort of put yourself out there in a society like Japan. And so like, you know, even you might, to the point of like lying to people, you know, just like beyond white lies, like when someone says, oh, do you like my hair? And you're like, oh, sure. Like, you know, wow, it's different. But actively going to a person who, so this is, at least this is my mom, maybe it's just my mom's own issue. But, you know, like I had my son, sorry, this little tangent, but I think it sort of illustrates that attitude. Is my son has this like wild curly hair, and I like let it grow when he was little because I thought it was great, and everyone would be like, oh my gosh, his hair is so wonderful. And my mom would tell me, you need to cut it, it's a mess, it looks horrible. And I would say, listen, people cross rooms to tell me how great his hair is. And she's like, they're just doing that because they don't like it.
Oh no.
Because they don't like it, and they want you, and they know that because it's so out of control, they know that you want it that way on purpose, so they're just trying to make you feel good. You know, and she's, you know, like, so that's how far it can possibly go.
I would say I don't think that's just your mom, because I have heard that before from my grandma talking to my mom. So I do recognize some of that. So if that makes you feel a little better, I've seen that happen. I'm like, really? They would do? Are you sure? Like, it's not just because they like it, or so. I totally understand that. There's another part of the story that really resonated with me on a different level, and that's where there's a new student, Miho, who joins Eriko's class in the 8th grade. And the teacher asks Eriko to kind of be Miho's, not friend, but like the person that will be able to help Miho, you know, transition from school in Japan to school in the US. And she also talks about how she doesn't really understand enough Japanese to be able to truly translate for Miho and truly understand what Miho may be saying, and also saying it back to her. I feel like, because with my mom's experience, my grandpa made sure that they knew English fluently. That was their first language. They didn't have them learn Chamorro, they didn't have them learn Japanese, it was English. And when my mom asked why later on as an adult, because she was one of the few that wasn't able to fully understand Chamorro or Japanese. She wasn't able to fully converse and fully understand. And my grandpa said that he didn't want his family or his children to be at a disadvantage when they go to the US. He didn't want them to have an accent, and he didn't want them to, to be looked at as, oh, they don't understand English, or their English is weird, so we're not going to take them seriously, or they're not as smart. So that's kind of what I thought about in that section, just because I remember my mom and my grandma having my grandpa having that conversation. But do you feel, when you wrote that scene, was it kind of similar in that aspect, or did you have another reason why Eriko wasn't really fluent in Japanese as much as maybe her parents would be, or somebody who grew up speaking Japanese would be?
Yeah, definitely. That's your mom's experience was exactly my experience. My mom, before I went to school, when I was 2 and 3 years old, she read like Mother Goose rhymes to me and like taught me English songs. And I mean, she spoke to me personally in Japanese, but she made a big effort to make sure I was hearing a lot of English. Looking forward to the day when I was going to go to school, and make sure that make sure I was spending time with kids who were speaking English. And my dad has spoken English, almost exclusively English, to me my whole life, probably for similar reasons, because he was out there working in and felt like, okay, you need to be ready. And with that encouragement, of course I'm going to run with it, because all my friends are speaking English, and they didn't push hard for me to continue to learn Japanese very much. May have been exacerbated by my sister, who was really stubborn and was sort of selectively deaf, and she wouldn't. My mom took her to the doctor and said, like, she doesn't listen to me, like she completely ignores me, and the doctor's like, her hearing's fine.
Oh, it's like, no,
is there exactly a pattern? Like, and it turns out, yeah, when my mom was speaking to her in Japanese, she was like, no, not gonna listen to you. So, and she's just a year younger than me, so I think that was like what broke my mom.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to ask that in a different way, to kind of provide some backstory as to why it wouldn't, not to say that one decision is better than the other, but just to really understand where parents are coming from when they do make that decision, and why maybe as an adult, one would feel a little disadvantaged for not knowing their native language as well as English sometimes, because I know that I know my mom feels that way. I know I feel that way. I don't speak Japanese fluently. I learned all throughout middle school and high school, and even then I didn't have anybody to speak with me, so that hasn't been really practiced as much. And I'm like, we're Japanese though, why didn't we ever do this? Why is it only English? And now that, I heard my grandpa say that, and I listened to you talk about that, I think I understand better being older as to why they really wanted to put us in that situation, or in that, that level of, they're not going to give that as a reason for why you cannot be here, or why you cannot succeed. So in a way, I do feel really grateful that that is what they did, thinking that way. But I do also feel like a part of me is missing because I didn't grow up with that. So it's kind of a catch-22. I feel both ways, but thank you for sharing that story. And yeah, I think it just, I feel like hopefully that will give some people insight as to why, certain people may not be fully fluent in their culture's language, or their parents' language for a reason. It's not just they didn't want to, or, you know, it could be a different reason, and that's what they should think about. One of the last questions, and it's more of like a general question about like the anthology, your experience with this, and I guess, yeah, just immigration as a whole. But what would be the one thing that you want young adults like me, or teenagers, or, you know, anybody really, to understand that when it comes to the immigrant experience, it shouldn't be looked at as a broad general topic that is the same for everybody?
That is a good question. I think that families who immigrate, particularly from cultures that are very different from American culture, there's definitely a mix of feelings about, you know, that varies from family to family, about how much of their own culture they want to preserve and how much they want to shed for a variety of reasons. And how deeply they want their own children immersed in American culture. Like how American do they want their own children to be? And yeah, I mean, because, you know, my parents really, they came here, they intended to stay. So they sort of did as much as they could to like embrace all the trappings of America. You know, like my mom like went all out on the Christmas decorations, which weren't a thing back then in Japan. Now they're like everywhere when it's Christmas time. But you know, and she we had donuts every Sunday, you know, like just all those details that they knew that Americans do, or that they do. Oh yeah, and then, you know, which morphed into, you know, like we'd have pancake Saturdays and gingerbread house. You know, my mom made a gingerbread house like from scratch every Christmas for us, because that's what she thought Americans did. And whereas other families, you know, you read a lot of immigrant stories where the parents are really like, no, like I want you to be as, you know, as Asian as possible. Like I want to prevent this Americanization for as long as I possibly can. And yeah, so it spans a spectrum. And I think some Americans expect, you know, you're here, you should embrace things the way my mom tried to, right? And then others are like, why would you throw your home culture away completely? So yeah, it's people come here for different reasons, and they already feel different ways about the place they came from. And you can't it's hard to make a generalization about that kind of thing.
Thank you. This is another bonus question, because I'm actually thinking about the Joy Luck Club movie right now. My mom really sees my grandma, her, and me in that movie. And there's a scene that I'm remembering where one of the moms, I think it was Waverly's mom, was talking about how they're too American now, like you were talking about. And I think Waverly's like, well, you raised me to be this way, and now you're telling me that I'm too American, but you, like, I grew up doing what you said. So that kind of, you know, that really makes me think about how would somebody, or if you've ever dealt with that situation, how do you combat the fact, you know, that feeling of either being too Japanese enough or too American or not enough for you to, or you or somebody else to really just understand that this is who you are, rather than people having to question you, like, are you sure you're even Japanese, you're not from there, or are you sure you're American enough, you don't look it? Like, how can somebody who's probably feeling that way, how can they overcome that, and how can they, you know, just understand that you are enough, no matter what you are enough?
Yeah, that it's a tough question. It took me a long time to figure things out for myself. And it's such an individual decision, sort of how much you want to embrace whichever side, you know. And I think, you know, like in my childhood, I would go to Japan intentionally hoping that people didn't think I could tell that I was American, which of course, with mixed results. And yeah, I really, really, I don't know, sorry, I'm sort of going off on this long tangent here, trying to figure myself out. I was really proud of being Japanese, but it was very rare that being Japanese in America was to my advantage, right? So it's this thing that you sort of treasure about yourself, but you can't let anybody else know about it. And so, which makes you also hate that part of yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And I think you just have to come to an understanding. I don't know how to make it happen faster or easier, but I think sort of learning to say to yourself, this part of me has value, like intrinsically, right? It doesn't matter what anyone else says or thinks about it. I can love this part of myself. And then if I can love it, that part of me that hates it needs to let go. Like the part of me that hates being Japanese, learn that from other people, right? And those people aren't worth listening to, really, right? Who hates anything? Like you can't hate it. It's not okay to hate a culture. So if it's not okay for someone else to hate that part of yourself, you should definitely not hate that part of yourself either. So I think that's where I'm landing right now.
That was really good. I feel like that was such a really nice note to end on. And hopefully, you know, others who may be feeling the same way can just remember, like what you said, if it's not okay to hate other cultures, you should not hate that part of yourself, because you are you and you should be proud. Like you said, be proud of who you are. And like you also said, you didn't learn it from yourself, you learned it from others, and they don't matter. So I think that was a really good message, and I think that was a really great message to end on. So yeah, again, Come On In comes out September. I think it comes out this month, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's almost out in the world. So get excited. And Misa Sugiura's story is one of a few, I want to say maybe about 11 or 12 stories in there. And different authors are coming to tell their stories. Definitely take a look at that. And also, it's not like it's a secret or this time will be different. You should definitely add those to your TBR. I personally loved It's Not Like It's a Secret, and I have This Time Will Be Different, so I can eventually read it. I need to move it up my TBR, but we all know how TBRs go. They never end. But it was so great to talk to you today, and thank you for allowing me to share some stories with you and just have a conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I had a great time.